The archive drawer opens with a metallic groan, the kind that echoes down stone corridors of wartime intelligence offices long emptied of their clerks. A single file sits inside, stamped in fading red ink. SOE, Crete. Operation, General Abduction, Most Secret. The title alone seems impossible, that during the Second World War a small band of undercover soldiers and local resistance fighters kidnapped a German general, drove him through his own checkpoints and delivered him to the Allies while thousands of Axis troops searched the island. But the file is real. The mission was real, and it remains one of the most astonishing audacity operations of the war. The first image of soldiers fighting across Europe reminds us of the scale of the conflict in 1944. Allied armies battered German lines in Italy. The Eastern Front burned under colossal battles, and in occupied Greece the island of Crete remained under suffocating German rule. The Germans held it since 1941, when airborne troops seized the island in a victory so costly that Hitler swore never to launch another parachute assault again. But Crete stayed vital, an airbase, a supply route, and a symbol of the Wehrmacht's iron grip on the Mediterranean. Tanks grinding across Europe fill the next frame. While armored divisions reshaped the continent, Crete lived under the weight of German boots, checkpoints, forced labor, and reprisals. Cretan villages had been burned to ash for resisting. Civilians lived under surveillance. German patrols roamed every road. Yet beneath the surface burned a fierce resistance, men and women who hid Allied agents in goat pens, supplied them with forged documents, and moved through the mountains like smoke. A sinking ship shows the naval war unfolding far from Crete's shores. The Mediterranean in 1944 was contested, dangerous, watched by German aircraft. Any Allied extraction across that sea required absolute timing and absolute silence. The SOE, the British Special Operations Executive, had agents on the island for years, supplying the resistance and gathering intelligence. But in late 1943 they received a message from London that seemed closer to madness than strategy. Kidnap a German general, steal him, remove him from the island, prove that even under occupation, even under the Reich's most watchful commands, the resistance could reach into the heart of German authority and drag one of its commanders into the night. Fighter planes sweep across the sky, a reminder that air superiority dictated every supply drop to Crete. SOE agents parachuted into ravines, olive groves, and mountain valleys, dodging German patrols and hoping their radio sets survived the impact. Bombed ruins appear next. Crete had seen its share, villages destroyed in retaliation for resistance actions. The Germans believed terror would control the island. They did not know that the mountains offered shelter to men London would soon rely on. Guides, partisans, shepherds who knew hidden paths the Germans had never walked. Then Allied landings flash across the screen, symbolic of the pressure mounting across Europe. The Allies prepared for D-Day. They needed diversions, morale victories, demonstrations of daring to boost resistance movements. But the mission on Crete was not a distraction. It was a precise strike aimed at the mind of the occupier. Civilians fleeing destroyed towns reflect the reality of Crete's suffering. Entire communities lived in fear of sudden German retaliation. SOE agents moved among them, protected by villagers at enormous personal risk. Radio operators tapping coded signals appear next. One message sent in late 1943 stands out. Notification that the German commander of Crete, General Friedrich Wilhelm Müller, was responsible for mass executions and brutality. London approved his abduction, but when SOE agents Patrick Lee Fermor and W. Stanley Moss arrived on Crete, Müller had been reassigned. His replacement was General Heinrich Kreipe, commander of the 22nd Air Landing Division. The mission remained the same: seize him, Nurses tending wounded soldiers remind us of the war's cost. Even as Greece starved, Allied agents slipped deeper into the interior. Fermor, fluent in Greek, moved through villages disguised as a Cretan shepherd. Moss trained local fighters in demolition and evasive tactics. Generals studying maps evoked the planning that shaped this improbable operation. Fermor knew they could not storm Crete's German headquarters. It was fortified. They could not ambush army columns. German convoys traveled with patrol vehicles. But Kripa followed one predictable habit. Each morning and evening he drove alone between his headquarters at Arcanes and his residence at Villa Ariadne in Knossos. That road became the key. Prisoners behind barbed wire appear, an image of the grim fate awaiting anyone caught helping the SOE. To shelter a British agent on Crete was to risk execution, yet dozens of locals joined the mission. Propaganda posters and newspapers reflect the psychological dimension of the kidnapping. London wanted Europe to know no German officer was safe from the reach of Allied commandos and resistance fighters. Submarines slipped through black water, similar to the craft that would extract Kripa once captured. The Royal Navy's Aegean squadron would wait offshore in darkness, timing their approach to match the mountain team's descent. Winter battlefield scenes appear, but on Crete, the winter meant cold caves, rain-soaked hillsides, and icy winds as resistance fighters prepared hideouts for the abduction team. Victory celebrations in Europe, still in the future, remind us why daring operations like this mattered. Every successful blow against the German occupation strengthened the morale of enslaved nations. Berlin in ruins appears, but in 1944 the German command on Crete felt secure. They believed the island sealed. They were wrong. Women in wartime factories remind us that thousands supported these small operations from afar. Radio builders, code breakers, aircraft crews, naval officers. Artillery fire echoes across the next image, symbolic of German reprisals. After the kidnapping, the Germans would retaliate brutally. But on the night of 26 April 1944, the operation went ahead. British and American officers planning D-Day signaled the strategic moment. The Allies were about to invade Europe. A blow to German prestige mattered. Bombers over a city closed the visual sequence. Their raids depended on intelligence, sabotage, and resistance networks like those on Crete. Now the story sharpens to its razor edge. At 9:30 p.m., General Kripa's car headlights appeared on the road. Fermor and Moss, disguised as German military police, stood at a fake checkpoint. Their Cretan team, armed with knives and kashes, waited in the shadows. The car slowed. "Papier, bitte," Fermor demanded in flawless German. Kripa leaned forward with irritation, then shock, when Moss leapt forward, yanked open the door, and dragged him out at gunpoint. The general struggled. He was overpowered. The commandos bound him, gagged him, and stuffed him onto the road verge. Within seconds, Fermor had donned the general's cap, taken his seat behind the wheel, and placed Moss beside him as a supposed German driver. The Cretan partisans pushed the German chauffeur down, tied him, and dragged the car aside. Then Fermor and Moss drove straight into the night wearing the general's insignia. And then came the impossible part. Passing through 24 German checkpoints. Soldiers saluted them. Guards waved them through. Searchlights swept past the stolen car without pausing. Kripa himself sat bound in the back seat, realizing with growing dread how perfectly the disguise worked. But the Germans discovered the abduction within hours. Alarm bells spread across the island. Patrols deployed. Roadblocks multiplied. By then, the team had abandoned the car, climbed into the mountains, and forced Kripa to march with them. German forces scoured the trails behind them. Aircraft circled overhead. But Cretan villagers hid the kidnappers in huts, caves, and ravines. They brought food. They misdirected German patrols. They shielded the raiders with their lives. For 3 weeks, the group moved from hideout to hideout across Crete's brutal mountain spine. Moss kept notes in his diary. Fermor kept the general calm. Cripa at one point recited Horace. Fermor completed the verse. A strange truce formed between captor and captive, one of culture, not war. Finally, under a moonlit sky on the southern coast, a British motor launch approached offshore, signaling in silence. Resistance fighters built a fire behind a rock, invisible from the sea but clear from the boat. The Commandos rowed out, Cripa aboard. Under German gunfire from the cliffs, the motor launch accelerated into darkness. By sunrise, the general was on his way to Cairo, and then to London for interrogation. The kidnapping electrified Europe. It humiliated the Germans. It inspired resistance movements across the continent. And it remains one of the greatest special operations of World War II. A mission executed by courage, deception, unity, and the mountains of Crete. The men who carried the general away did not use tanks, planes, or armies. They used disguises, forged papers, local guides, and the willingness to risk everything for a single act of defiance, one that cut straight through the heart of German authority and proved that occupation, no matter how tight, was never absolute.